Hi guys, welcome to the Fife Property Show. This is it's a fantastic day today outside. It's absolutely beautiful. The sun is shining. What on earth are you doing watching this show? Anyway, let's kick off. I've long argued about managing agents and they're really worth their money. So we're going to thrash it out today. So on board with us today, we've got Richard Cook, our Lettings Director.
Morning, Jim.
Hi, Richard. And we've got Karen.
Good morning.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
Morning, Karen.
I'm good. I'm looking at the lovely view outside. It's a beautiful day.
Yeah. Good morning, Dougie. Thanks for watching the show. And if anybody else is there, please take time to ask any questions. We're open to questions and we're open to answering them as well live as we talk through this. So I've long argued all this time for the argument about really letting agents are really that important. You could do it all yourself. But is that really the case? So we've decided to put together an article, the pros and cons. Is a managing agent actually really worth your money? So I'll be honest and say it does take a certain character to be a managing agent. The job has a reputation as a thankless task with days of complaints, emergencies, breakdowns, hassles. And if we're honest, rarely does anyone call the news and say, everything's fine. Richard's laughing, and Karen, you're obviously trying to hold this back. I mean, why? Why, Richard? Why are you holding this back? What are you laughing about?
It's because obviously a big part of obviously managing a property is dealing with the day-to-day run-ins of obviously maintenance, and I mean every day there could be lots of unexpected repairs, and unfortunately our job is to relay that back to the owners. So it does feel like we're constantly on the phone with bad news, but I think the reality is because we're constantly doing it every day, it's resolving these issues before they become worse and because of a bigger problem which could be more costly and take a lot more time to resolve in the long run if they're left. But it does feel like a wee bit.
Yeah, pretty much the same. Just Richard's kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's just people phone up with, like, unfortunately, it's just issues that they phone up with. It's amazing when somebody phones up and says, thank you for getting this fixed for me. We really appreciate that call because, like you say, it is just usually maintenance issues that come up. But at the same time, we're so used to dealing with it that we know what we're doing and we know the best way to handle it. So it's with as opposed to a landlord that's getting a report that they've no idea how to get rid of.
Yeah, from my point of view, it's a case that, from a landlord's point of view, it's a case that, God, no, another call at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's relentless. So from a degree for that, I always felt like a social worker, most of the time because I felt that everybody had to phone me about every single problem I had. And it became overwhelming over a period of time. But we'll talk about that as we go on. But to be a managing agent, you also have to be a person who makes everything right. A property that never needs maintained or where nothing ever goes wrong. It simply doesn't exist, and emergencies really do happen. And emergencies rarely happen at a convenient time, really, do they? I got a phone call last night at 9 o'clock at night, and somebody asked me, I'm just looking for advice because my toilet's no flushing. And my first response was, is that an emergency? And they went, well, no, really. I says, well, could you wait till tomorrow? And we'll call you back. And I sent it on, to property management. But it's like, really? You're phoning me at 9 o'clock at night to ask about your toilet? It wasn't flushing. They just had a general question about if it was right or if it worked right or anything like that. And I thought, that's not really an emergency when you think about it. So they just phoned for a general chat. So I've referred it on and it'll get picked up today. So, it rarely happens at the most convenient time, not for homeowners, not for tenants, and certainly not for landlords. For a managing agent, they're expected, it's an expected part of the day, really. That's what it comes down to. But they're an existing or budding landlord. This is the key here. You're right to keep an eye out for things ongoing, but you might have even questioned whether a managing agent is really worth the expense. Often, a classic example is everything goes right. And immediately the landlord goes, I tell you what, I'll just take that property back because everything's going right. And it's like, the reason it's going right is, why is the reason it's going right, Richard?
Because we're monitoring that and making sure it's obviously streamlining the process to make sure things are not going wrong. That's what I mean, identifying something before it gets to that stage where it's then a bigger problem. And unfortunately, like you say, emergencies tend to crop up at the worst times, whether that be through like the Christmas holidays and things. that's when we tend to have a lot of the emergency repairs.
Karen?
Yeah, I'd agree. It seems to be winter's notorious for boilers breaking down, and contractors are so overrun with it. So it helps having an agency that has the workers on supply to be able to get the job done as quickly as possible, so your tenants aren't without heating or hot water. You're not having to deal with a boiler repair on Christmas Day.
It's a classic example, though. I mean, winter obviously tests every single heating system because that's the time that they get used. I always used to remember. I mean, I've obviously been in the industry over 27 years as a landlord, as an investor as well. But often all the engineers used to say to me, winter is the test, because everybody switches their heating off in the summer, and immediately all these wee solenoids and valves and everything like that, they're all sitting idle. So they sometimes get stuck. So the classic example is when you switch the heating back on, doesn't work. And then that's when everybody starts to get called out. So it's almost like a rush at the same time. Exactly what happened with the housing market, where the doors opened and we're allowed to buy houses now, and everybody rushes in at the same time and starts buying, and it causes a boom.
Yeah, I mean, we anticipate and prepare for it every year, because as soon as the temperature drops, then it gets cold outside. Everybody's firing up their boilers, and like you say, they've been sitting idle for the majority of the summer and springtime, and that's when obviously the issues arise with boilers. And then obviously, if people's boilers don't work, they've not got heating, they've not got hot water. If people have got children and things as well, it's a necessity that obviously everybody needs. So we anticipate.
But do you include personal costs as well? How much do you value your time as a landlord, an investor, and how do you spend it? That's really what it comes down to. I mean, I get a bit geeky and a bit clinical about the whole thing, and I'm quite prepared to work for 24 hours a day. But you don't get people like me all the time, really, I suppose. And you actually need some sort of quality of life, everybody says. I've yet to find it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think personal time for a landlord's perspective, especially, I mean, even if they've just got a couple of properties or even they've got a bigger portfolio, unless they are obviously committed and that's what they want to do, but if they want to see an income coming through but also value their own time on a personal level, I think it's good to have somebody, and like obviously a managed agent in place, to then take the stresses and like you say, those middle of the night phone calls or these phone calls through the holidays and things, that's what our job is to do, and to take that stress away and deal with just minor things that would bother a landlord and take up their time without them even having the knowledge of it happening until it's done and resolved and says, this is what we've done. Oh, great, you've done that, that's fine. Whereas it would have took maybe a couple of days out their time to try and go through the process, resolve it, and have it repaired, where we just do it on behalf.
But then as a landlord with maybe just one or two properties, then does that really matter? Is that going to be really an encumbrance on me? You know, is that going to be a problem?
Well, it just depends on each individual landlord and how much they value their time. I mean, some people want to have a small portfolio and want it to fill up their time because maybe they're retired and this is what they want, something to get their teeth into, which is fine. Other landlords who are maybe doing it alongside, who are still obviously employed and working and want to do it alongside their employment to maybe build up their pension fund and things, that's where obviously it's going to start encroaching into your personal time.
I could relate to that completely, because obviously you'll know my background working as an accountant in industry constantly. So I was working 128 hours a week in industry. I literally had no sleep. So I used to just get my boiler suit on and go straight out the door with all my stuff in my car and go and work on my properties after hours. And there was nights that I actually was in a daze because I hadn't had any sleep at all in order to get the result for the next day for a tenant to move in. And was it healthy? Possibly not. Could I have done something different? Possibly could have. Possibly could have. But then it's coming down to the fact that, do you really trust the agent that you're actually dealing with? I mean, Charlotte's asked a really good question here, and she said, good morning, Charlotte. How much does it cost a day to have a managing agent take care of your property?
There's a good saying, and obviously we demonstrate that to landlords quite a lot. And I mean, the daily charge for a managing agent is about the price of a cup of coffee. And if you think about that, most people go out every day, buy a cup of coffee. You think for the price of that, you could take the stress away and get your own personal time back for somebody else to deal with it. And that's a good way to obviously kind of demonstrate it to landlords and people that's the overall cost really on a daily basis, if you think about it.
So literally £2.50 a day. I'm getting my calculator out. You're right. That's about it. £2.50 a day to get somebody else to take all the hassle off you.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a no-brainer when you think about it, eh?
It's a good way to demonstrate it to people. Morning, May.
Morning, May.
Okay, so, I mean, this is how we've done this. So this week's blog, we've talked about. Now, the full article is in the post itself. So this week's blog is not to convince you to use a managing agent, but to show you how life can be if you did, from inspections to maintenance and easier accounting, to keep it on the right side of the law. Geez, the law. The law gets worse and worse, or more challenging every time. It's like there's over 50 pieces of legislation governing our industry, and that's only when the tenant moves in. There's legislation governing everything before the tenant actually gets in. So that's all the different things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So from the right side of the law, protecting you in the event of disputes, that's the key here. I often say to a lot of landlords, it's like, you're not paying us to manage the property to a degree. You're paying us if anything goes wrong, we're able to react to it quick enough in order to get the resolved solution, whereas you don't know what to do and where to go to get that. But now that's only from a personal point of view, and I'm quite fortunate. I've studied all that, so everybody understands. I was the chairman of the National Landlord Association in Scotland, which is the UK's biggest landlord association. So I was their chairman in Scotland for 10 years. I was also on their helpline for Scotland, actually advising and telling tenants and landlords as well what they need to do in order to resolve certain situations. So it was key for me to understand all the legal processes. So I often think everybody knows this, and I often take it for granted. But when I went through the Child Property Action Group, which is almost like 300-400 pages on the housing benefit legislation, just the housing benefit legislation, that was it. It was 400 pages you had to go through in order to just know what you were talking about when it came to the housing benefit legislation. And that was only recovery over payments, where landlords were actually faced with the fact that your tenant got paid this money, they've now done something wrong, so we're going to recover it back from you as a landlord. Wow.
Yeah.
That happens. That happens quite a lot in the past. So Dougie's got a good question. Are private landlords more focused on letting the property? More voids if using an agent? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that using an agent is the best way to try and avoid having too many or extensive void periods between tenancies. I've done a few vlogs on that in the past, and I think a big part of that is finding the right tenant in the first instance. If you find the right tenant, if they're managed properly, if they're happy in the property and the property is kept obviously compliant and up to date, then they're more likely to stay for a longer period of time. And if in the event that they do decide to leave, if the property is kept up to standard, it's in a good condition, it'll let a lot easier, therefore a shorter void period. And I think that's a key factor in void periods, and a managing agent is there to obviously kind of implement the measures to make sure that happens.
What's your thoughts on that, Karen?
I'd agree, and even just it means that if you've got an agent in place, we're kind of in the mindset of we know what we're looking for with. We've got a vetting process in place that we can kind of, I mean, at the end of the day, there's always going to be a change in circumstances that could pop up at any time. You never know. So you always have to prepare for what could happen. But at the end of the day, we do our research on the person and make sure that they're going to be suitable for the property. And it also means as well, if you're going to an agent, they've got the facilities to be able to market to the best of its ability, basically. So you're going to get a lot more interest, basically get your pick of.
Yeah, I think the key here for me is I would be on Dougie's side to a certain degree. As a landlord and as an owner, you're completely focused on your own property. You're not really focused on anybody else's property at all. So your intention is to do that. However, the flip side of that is, where do you get your tenants from? Do you go to Gumtree and take a risk? Because a lot of tenants just go to Gumtree. Here's a classic example why they go to Gumtree is because they don't want to go through the referencing process. An agent has, because they know they'll fail it.
I think it's all about due diligence in the first instance and making sure. And I think not even just the reference side in terms of obviously validating their employment and their references and who they are. It's also meeting the people face to face and obviously getting a feel for the person and who they are and whether they will be right for the property and what kind of tenant the landlord wishes to have in the property as well. That's a big part.
I can totally agree with that as well. Just because you can have somebody face to face and you can have somebody on paper, but you have to put the two together to kind of get a better idea of it. Somebody could feel on paper, but you meet them face to face and they're not.
This is a good one for KPIs and voids. Absolutely, Dougie. We do. Our void period, our occupancy rate is 96%.
Yeah.
Our occupancy rate is 96%. So 4% of that is the void. So that is probably one of the highest of any letting agent going. It is key. I've implemented everything that I've thought as a landlord into our system so we can keep an eye on these things all the time. So that's our void. That's our occupancy rate is 96%. And our rental level as well, we keep KPIs on that as well about the average rent that's coming in, and we keep an eye on all the rental values in the area in order to keep it highest as possible. If you can get an extra £5 every single month, right, that's £60 a year. If you've got 10 properties, that's £600 a year extra, straight on your bottom line in your pocket as a landlord. Your boiler goes after 3 years. You've got £1,800 towards your boiler that you never had before, only because your letting agent kept an eye on your rental level. That's how important that becomes. So you no longer put your hand in your pocket. Your rental agent pays for themselves. That's the key here. So if you can get more as a result, that's why we keep an eye on it. So it's completely focused on that issue.
Yeah, key performance indicators are a big part of obviously the whole management process that we have, and Jim and I have implemented a lot of them over the years to keep obviously track of what's going on and make sure obviously things like void periods and that are obviously monitored, and that's obviously, like you say, our occupancy rate is extremely high, and it has been for a long time.
So let's talk about one of the most important subjects, keeping things legal. Well, an eye-watering number of self-managed landlords lose disputes at the end of the tenancies, which highlights a gap in their knowledge. And let me elaborate on that. If one of your hobbies is scrolling through the government's website for changes in legislation regarding rental property, you're unlike anyone we ever know.
Always break the mold, Jim.
That's a bit true. It's a time-consuming task and a rolling responsibility that many landlords fall foul of. You need not only to look for the eye-watering number of landlords who lose disputes. If you get anything wrong in the legal process, the law will likely find in favour of your tenant. We saw that classic example before in the past, where Jim Bald used to represent the social landlord, the social tenants. He used to represent them from Glasgow. Jim Bald's a brilliant solicitor and a legal guy. His mind is absolutely unbelievable. Blows me out of this world in terms of what the knowledge is. So Jim used to represent tenants. He used to tell us of all the different things that he was able to keep the tenant in the property, regardless that the landlord had actually served the notice correctly, and all these wee pitfalls. And why did he tell us? Because he changed to the other side and he actually represented landlords. So Jim actually represents landlord now. In a legal capacity. So he's actually told us all the different things that you can actually keep a tenant in a property. So we know what to do in order to avoid a tenant, so that make sure the process actually goes through properly. So that's one of the key things about understanding the process. But while the landlord and lettings legislation can certainly be a minefield, it's not one that you need to walk through. Managing agents are charged with to know all he needs to know and take the appropriate action where it is available. It's not something on top of our job. It's our job. I often say that we get into dispute sometimes, not with this, not with anything else. But I often say to Richard, but the reality, Richard, it's their job. They're there to do that full time. They're paid for that full time. We have to fit that in our normal day-to-day work in order to argue that principle with them. And the classic example is when I go to Kevin Stewart and send him emails, the housing minister, and Jenny Gilruth, and I send her emails. That's their full-time job. But it's not my full-time job. I'm an estate agent. That I have to run several businesses. So they've got all the time in the world, and they've got all the resources at their fingertips to prove you wrong or argue their case, whereas you've only got, half an hour a day, if that, to do that. So that's probably why you need a specialist involved. I'm arguing for a letting agent now.
I think obviously, in terms of legislation and the legalities of things, there's been so much changes, and there's always changes obviously happening. But in the past few years, there's been quite a lot. If you think back think for maybe about 2015, 2016, a lot of new legislation come in. I think round about maybe when you joined us, Karen. So you'll be aware, obviously, things like EICRs, which is electrical safety, and all these kind of legislation were put in place. So we've had to obviously change how we operate, and things like obviously joining Letwell to get ourselves obviously up to speed with a lot of the new changes was quite helpful for us. And obviously landlords didn't have the time or maybe even the resource or money to do those kind of things. I mean, that training that we done was brilliant, and we were part of the first group in Scotland to complete it. And obviously that made us Letwell certified, but it also gave us thirsty knowledge for the legislation, and we just build on that year on year, depending on what obviously, and there's continually new legislation being implemented with the government, and it's our job to obviously keep up to date with that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, as soon as a new piece of legislation becomes law, you're basically ensuring that the property that you manage throughout line and the landlords need to know. They'll need to know, but you actually keep an eye on that. But the landlords rarely need to know that because you're actually looking after that.
Yeah.
I'm arguing for the letting agent again. Wait a minute, I shouldn't be. But as a landlord, I actually like that. You know, as a landlord, I like getting involved in that. I like knowing about all the legislation. I like learning about all the legislation. I like fighting that case. I mean, I often pick up landlords. Cases just for sport. You know, and say, right, I'll take it on, and basically we're up for a fight.
Yeah, because it's a shame sometimes. I mean, I do come across landlords who obviously we don't manage and things, and they're up against obviously a dispute, and they're at their depth because they don't know what obviously what their obligations are, what their rights are, whether they're in the right or whether they're in the wrong. And you try what you say. It's good to know the legislation and know that you're operating things correctly and you're doing it correctly, and that you know your stuff basically.
It's the first tier tribunal as well. The first tier tribunal, the processes and that. See, when you get all that paperwork through the post, it's a minefield, and it's
very
like,
daunting. Yeah.
Now that's from a landlord's point of view, because I've just gone through that, and they've actually just this is one of my properties where a tenant made a complaint, a simple complaint. It was nothing to do. There was everything right. They had done everything wrong. They had damaged the property continually all the time, all the way throughout the process of the let. They wouldn't let the letting agent in to fix the property, which is you guys, and then therefore they turned around the housing tier panel and said, by the way, the landlord's no fixing anything, but you're no letting us in to fix it. You're refusing to let us in to fix it. So it's only yesterday I got the letter through, finally, after a year and a half, to say that, there's nothing to answer to.
It's a very long process.
But it's a year and a half of, effectively, if you guys hadn't taken this on board, a year and a half of my time completely consumed with something which was a complaint from a tenant who had no justified reason to complain in the first place. For nothing that was wrong with the property. And yet, because it was the first tier tribunal, they had to go through the legal process. I come back to saying again, that's their job. That's the one we're saying. Their job is they're paid to do that job. So their job is completely to be consumed to see you as that person, really.
Yeah, their sole focus is to obviously concentrate on these kinds of cases. But when it lands on your desk, you've got a million other things to do, but you're going to have to then turn your attention to this for at least a portion of the time to try and obviously correspond to them. And they need a lot of feedback, and you need to compile evidence and obviously correspondence. And it's quite time consuming. And like you say, obviously it took us a year and a half, but I'm really happy with that outcome. And at the time, I was quite, obviously, Jim, I represented you a lot in that case, which was good because it gave me an opportunity to see how the system works, because obviously we'd never been through that before. So it was a bit of a learning curve.
I'm just about to say that. We've never been through that before.
No.
How long have we been in lettings?
Well, that's the thing, it's a learning curve. We're always learning as we go on. Like, these new situations will crop up that we do learn from, and it means that we've got that knowledge going forward. And talking about that in specific, it made things easier because we've done inspections at the property, we knew what the tenant had damaged and what was general wear and tear. We fully knew the situation of that property, which meant we had the evidence to back up our side of it. So if you've got an agent in place, they have the information, but we should have the information there to support your case if you ever find yourself in this situation.
Yeah, Karen, you've done a lot of the correspondence for that as well, which was, like I say, a good learning curve for you as well.
Yeah.
Here's a classic, what Dougie says. Right, okay, now I'll just say something after this. Are landlords liable for costs for any legal disputes? Or is that encompassed in the management fee? Well, the answer to that is prevention is better than cure, really.
Yeah.
But you're going to answer that question, Richard. So are landlords liable for the legal costs, or is it encompassed in the management fee?
Well, the landlords will be, obviously, if there's any legal cost, it will be obviously the responsibility of the landlord. The good thing, obviously, it's a double-edged sword here with the first tier tribunal, because it opens up an avenue where complaints can obviously be kind of escalated very, very quickly, but obviously it allows the landlord to put through applications, whereas it used to be, I mean, if things were like small claims and things, used to be a costly way to go down, route to go down. But the first tier tribunal, you could put applications and that's through the first tier tribunal, and they don't cost to initially do that. Karen, you'll be able to fill us in on the first tier tribunal application process, because you've done it for this case what we're talking about.
Yeah, there was no cost incurred to either the landlord or the agent. It's obviously it's such a small kind of claims process that there aren't at this point. Obviously, if it ended up escalating even further, there might be ones incurred further down the line, for example. But through the process that we've been through, there hasn't been any. And even this was a while ago now, but we had a landlord who the tenant did not want to move out. So we had to look into the situation of going to the tribunal for an order of possession, and thankfully it didn't come to that. But we know the forms that we need to use now. We know there isn't cost incurred to the landlord for it. You can actually put in a claim to recover the costs that they've lost from the tenants refusing to move out, basically.
Yeah. But prevention is ultimately better than cure. And I'm jumping onto this one. This is further in what we're going to do. This takes us to confrontations then. So the prevention is better than cure, and it's actually resolving the situation. So having a third party and one of authority to step in can alleviate situations fast without them getting personal overheated. Often I've heard a landlord say, like, I'm just wanting them out because I can't stand them. They argued with me, or they just said this and they just said that. And I'm thinking, whoa, wait a minute. What is the commercial reality out of this? You put a tenant out, it's going to cost you thousands to get them put out. You know, you're going to have all the ground to do that. So you're going to have to spend all that money to do it. Then they've got the cost of refurb because of the move out, and it's not exactly how you should have it. You're going to have the cost of the refurb, you're going to have the cost of the void, you're going to have everything else on top of that. Then you're going to have the cost of reletting, and then finding a tenant and putting the right tenant, and then taking the risk that you didn't have the right tenant in the first place. All because you fell out with the tenant and you didn't like them. Really? Commercial reality goes right out the window when it gets so personal, and that's sometimes when it's important to use a managing agent.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, the third party, which is us, obviously, to step in and be that buffer and mediate in a situation like that is really important, because, like you say, when it gets to a personal level, and if landlords are having the direct contact with the tenants, then it could get messy. And I think it's good for us to come in, like I say, impartial, to either, obviously, representing each party in the middle and mediating a situation like that.
Here's how I see it.
Okay.
Opposites attract.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the landlord, it'll be the issue. It's sometimes often their partner who doesn't understand the situation, but really gets annoyed about how much pressure it's putting on their partner, because opposites attract. That's what it is. So while you as a landlord are easygoing, sometimes the person you're with isn't that easygoing, and they're quite fiery and fired up. So as a result, they put pressure on the landlord, and everybody gets grief as a result of it within that unit, and therefore they take the decision, look, we're just going to get rid of the tenant. And it's like, well, what, you're getting rid of the tenant just for that? That's crazy. That's thousands of money. And so often I've had landlords come to us, not anything to do with our agency. They've come to us with that dilemma, and I've actually said to them and advised them, like, I've told them the situation, and they've realised it's well, you're absolutely right. And they've gone away calm about it. But I've actually stepped in and I've spoken to the tenant and resolved the situation. But again, they're nothing to do with our letting agency. It's just that I've done that for them in order to sort that, because I really want the tenant to stay where they are, because it's not the tenant's fault. You know, it's just the fact that the aggravation that happens in between two parties. I mean, the odd malfunction or minor repair is one thing, But when problems come one after another, or where your tenant experiences a change in circumstances or becomes a nuisance, the relationship and communication can become extremely strained. You've probably had the experience where it feels like things are going wrong at home. First the boiler, then the washing machine, then the extractor fan, then the tap. And on their own, they're tiny issues, but often a matter of wear and tear. But the difference is that your extractor fan is not interrupting someone else's life. You might be a bit miffed when it stops working, but no one's going to get angry with you. Now, let's consider a tenant whose finances take a turn for the worst, or someone who causes problems among your neighbours, whether deliberately or accidentally. Again, this comes back to saying the tenant's absolutely brilliant, but sometimes the entourage that comes with them is the problem. You know, the threat. And that's another issue for antisocial behaviour. So this is all things that you screen out in the beginning to make sure you get the right tenant in the first place. So thankfully, these occasions are scarce, but there is rarely any warning, and they could have a major impacts for you as a landlord, which might affect your ability to keep your cool. That's often the case. A lot of people think, it's no bother, I could easily, but it's a case of the as a landlord, it's the straw that broke the camel's back, if anybody understands that.
Yeah.
So it's nothing to do with the tenant, but it's everything else that happens on your life round about you. And then all of a sudden the tenant phones up and says, my boiler's broken down. And then you go, whoa, you go straight into orbit. And it's like, what do I do now? I'm all stressed and I have to organise this, I have to organise that. And often that's maybe why you need someone else to come in and help you. That's how I feel as a landlord sometimes. Yeah. I'm running 3 or 4 different businesses, which I do, and then I've got all my properties, which I do, and then I've got a day-to-day job, which I do, and then I've got a family I have to look after, and then I've got kids as well, and I've got cats as well. Lots of cats. And then I've got a garden to keep. Oh my goodness. And then I've got other things to do, so there's all these different things, and I've got people I want to help, and I've got local causes I want to help, and I want to be involved in everything else. It can become a little overwhelming. So having the third party and one authority to step in on your behalf can actually alleviate the situations fast without them getting personal or overheated. But I think the key here is, though, prevention's better than cure, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, going back to obviously the repairs thing, obviously boilers, washing machines, extractor fans, these are all the most common repairs. And Kieran, you'll know that, obviously working in property management for years. And it's all these wee minor things that obviously we pick up on, we resolve, and although they may seem minor, if they're left to get worse, or if they are not obviously dealt with correctly, and then everything happens at once, it could put a lot of pressure on the landlord, take up a lot of their time, and like you say, take them away from what they want to really be spending their time doing.
Yeah.
So preventing these issues or dealing with them quickly, obviously kind of minimises that issue.
Yeah, and that's where it also comes on to things like trusted contractors next. I mean, it is actually literally taking us years and plenty of tears to build a circle of tradespeople. There's really something we haven't dealt with before. I mean, I often, and I spoke to you about it yesterday, Dougie's watching, about the fact that, all our contractors get tested out on my properties first. Unfortunately, I take the brunt. I take the brunt of that. So if they're not that good, then my property takes the brunt. But I take the hit, and our personal landlords don't take the hit at all as a result of it. So that's often what happens. So trusted contractors and how that works. Have you ever been in a conversation about the difficulties in finding reliable companies to repair something at your home, or where a contractor came in, charged the earth, and made matters worse as a result of it? Almost everyone has experienced some kind of version of that. And it's one thing to be waiting for a plumber at your own home, but when it comes to meeting them miles away in a 3-hour arrival window in the middle of winter, if it's not really the same. So you have to go out your way to rate the property, to wait, for example, for Scottish Power. It says, it's an all-day appointment, and you've got to wait ages. And it's like, I could be better spending my time doing something else, and I could pay a letting agent £2.50, the price of a cup of coffee, to do that for me.
Yeah,
£2.50 to wait all day. Do you guys want a job? £2.50.
I mean, wow. I think people underestimate the time that you spend, even like you said, on the phone for companies like utility companies. They've got a home care package. The amount of time that you spend on hold, even just trying to get through to them in the first place, that's potentially half an hour that you could have been doing better with your time than sitting on hold.
Yeah, it's all about trust. I mean, James has said it there. I'm using a guy you recommended, Jim, to do my refurb. A great guy, and he's doing a grand job. And that's really what it comes down to. It's all personal recommendation about. I will never recommend, and I've always said it. People now, this is a key for contractors. Do not walk into my office and think that you can put your business card or your flyer on my desk without me using you first, because it is a personal endorsement from Fife Properties of your brand. If one of my customers walks in and picks up your flyer and I don't have a clue who you are, if you want to do business with us, then let us test you out first. And if you're really good at your job, we will put you on our trusted contractors list. And as a result, we will recommend you to everyone else as well. It is key and vital in our reputation. People we recommend we've used before in order to make sure that it doesn't come back to haunt us. The last thing I want to do is somebody come back and say, you recommended this person and they never did a good job at all. And it's like, where did you get them from? Well, I've never used them. Why on earth would you recommend somebody like that? But there are often people do that, doesn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've spent a lot of years building up good relationships with trusted contractors. But obviously, you need more than one every contractor, especially when you manage quite a lot of properties. And obviously, contractors, we have a lot of obviously long-standing contractors that we have, and we've got good relationships with them. But obviously, we're always looking to bring on new people, expand, obviously, and obviously divvy up works and things between them. So, and like you say, Jim, I think we're doing it the other day with new contractors, testing them on new properties, just to make sure that basically trial running them, because we're not going to recommend them to other landlords who's paying us to find trusted contractors and send people to do a job that's obviously going to be inferior or unsatisfactory.
As a person in industry before as an accountant, I've realised how draconian industry was towards contractors. They always used to use their money and actually get credit terms off them and actually use their money to run their own businesses, if anybody understands that. And I really thought that was completely wrong. When a contractor does the job and they've finished the job and they've done it perfectly, they should be paid straight away when it's signed off. They shouldn't have to wait, and they shouldn't need to give credit as a result, because they're not in there to be a credit controller. That is not their business. They're there to run their business and do a good job and make money, and not waste their time on trying to chase you for money that you should have paid in the first place. And I'm extremely draconian about that, and said, you know, as soon as a job's finished and it's signed off in my part from me as a landlord, I expect my contractor to be paid immediately, regardless. Regardless if I've got rent for a property, my contractor should be paid. And for that reason is why when I pick up the phone to a contractor, they will immediately jump and go and do the job for me straight away in order to get it resolved, which keeps my tenant happy. And as a result, keeps my occupancy rate high and also my reputation rate high for my properties as a result. So always money coming in, everybody always happy. My longest tenant stayed with me for 20 years. And he's paid money day in, day out all the time. And even when he's actually come to us and says, look, I'll sort it out later on. And he has.
Yeah, that's what we spoke about yesterday, Jim, obviously. And again, it goes back to obviously avoiding the void periods and having longevity in your tenancies, and a high occupancy rate is obviously keeping your tenant happy, keeping the property in good condition and up to scratch.
This is a good comment from Phil. Trust as well, access into the property when no one is there. That's key as well, because we know all the contractors. We can trust them. They've been in my house. They've been in other house. They've been in my personal house. A lot of them. So I use them for my own personal jobs, and I would happily trust them to come in my house and give them the keys and let them get on my job. So for tenants, that is a real peace of mind to understand that that's what we do. James has actually made a comment as well. I've been paying mine for a quarter at a time throughout the refurb, which is brilliant, James. It's the right way to go. And he's absolutely right as well. It means they don't get a shock at the end if the costs escalate as a result. As well. So for him, there's good planning for him as well, because it keeps your cash flow right, so you don't think you've got an abundance of money. It's amazing when the VAT return comes in after I look at my bank account and go, oh, damn. I look at my bank account before the quarter end and think, wow, we've got a lot of cash, and the VAT return comes in, it's like, all right, okay, I don't have a lot of cash. It's all VAT to be paid to the government. Which brings us neatly on to the next subject, which is, I'll just get it now, which is tax relief.
Yeah.
Ding, 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 tax relief. Where, I mean, imagine receiving a simple statement of all of your income and expenditure without a single piece of paper to lose. That is probably one of the benefits of using a managing agent, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of landlords, the fact that obviously they get their statements with everything that they need on there, that goes straight into their tax return, is a big plus. I mean, if you're not using a managing agent and you didn't have that facility and you're obviously a landlord on your own, I think doing your tax return becomes a lot more difficult, and you put it off and you end up doing it last minute, and there's receipts and paperwork and stuff all over the place. Yeah.
I'll have to put that later on, though.
I think there'll be a lot of people yeah, there'll be a lot of people in the same boat right now, obviously at last minute scrambling about paper, receipts and everything. So to have that a more streamlined process with your statements and things all in place for your agent is definitely important.
Literally, by the way, just print my statement every single month, right? And just give me the 12 statements for the year, and I'll just put them on my tax return, and that's the end of it. I don't need to go and collect the receipts because you've done it all for me, and you hold all the receipts, and I don't need to hold them as a result of that. Therefore, job done. Tax return done. No hassle. Paperwork.
Yeah, your rent, any works carried out, everything's on these statements.
So, I mean, if anything, it's like most people. I mean, the inside of your wallet, your purse, are generously sprinkled about your numerous pockets in your pockets and your jacket and everything like that. The occasional triumphant box in the corner involving all your receipts. Often, when I remember in the accountancy world, where they used to tell me some of the guys I knew were accountants, actual number crunchers, and they said, "Oh, good, my landlords or my investor came in and they just handed me a box of receipts." And I was literally just a shoebox with all the receipts, and goes, "There you go, go and sort that out for me." And I'm thinking, geez, if you just kept an eye on it every single month and just done it each at a time, it would have been a lot easier for you as a natural result of that. And that's literally how landlords do. I mean, when you've only got one or two properties, you didn't think it's important, but the reality is the government does, and you'll get nailed to the wall because they've got trackers and tracers and everything now, and indicators to tell you because housing benefit actually sends them a report now. So the DWP send them a report of what you're getting in receipts for local housing allowance, and also from universal credit, and then somebody else sends them information. Your lawyer, for example, you bought a property, sends them information about a second property as well, and then the HMRC march this all up and say, you had a second property, you've got all these receipts coming in from housing benefit, and where's your tax return? This doesn't match your tax return, mister. Mrs. You're out to send you a letter. By the way, you're just £50,000 in tax, and you have to prove them otherwise. That's exactly what happens with the tax man. They send you a bill if you can't, and you have to prove otherwise. And it's the only system, the tax man, where you're guilty until you prove you're innocent.
Otherwise, yeah,
that's really it. So when it comes to completing the tax return, really, I mean, you've said it yourself, Richard, it's checking the credit card, bank statements and trawling through all these things, but you can actually do that all for them because you've got it all in receipts every single month and it's sent to them. So I think that's one of the keys, which I would say is really good as well. So let's jump on to the next subject, which is inspections. Tell them all about inspections, Richard. You'll certainly save time and never inspect the property again, but the message of dissent might well be returned by your tenants. So regular inspections, how is that important to me as a landlord? I mean, when I first started, it was like, there's the house, call me if there's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, inspections are really important, and like you say, call me if there's a problem. The amount of tenants that don't call you a problem, and they're only identified when you actually do the inspection, and you're like, why did you not tell us about this? I mean, things like if there's maybe some water ingress or something, and the tenant just obviously a bit complacent about it. But to us, it's an issue which should have been rectified right at the beginning to stop it escalating. So if we're in there every quarter doing inspections, making sure the property is obviously in a good condition, everything's up to standard, your smoke alarms are still in place, your tenant's happy in the property, again, obviously keeping them in place longer, and obviously again adding to your occupancy rate. I mean, they're really important. And the quarterly inspections we do, I mean, we've got a lot of long...
Quarterly?
Quarterly
Most people do
inspections.
6 monthly, and most people do yearly, and most people don't do anything at all now.
I mean, we have with some of our longer standing tenants who have been in there a long time, and the landlord's in agreement. Obviously, we do 6 month inspections, but new tenancies for the first year or two at least, we do quarterly inspections to make sure everything's obviously kept ticking over. The property, like I say, is kept good, and the tenant's still happy in there. Because sometimes they'll not pick up the phone and tell you about all these wee minor things, and they don't realise that all these wee minor things could result in a bigger repair.
Tell me about it, Richard. I'm going to have a monathon now. The amount of time I used to go around and see my tenants, and this was in the early days, way before letting agents, so I did it all myself. The amount of times I used to go around and I used to go and see them to see how they were doing. It's like, oh, there's something wrong. Just a minor thing that happened. I'd go around to see them, and the next thing I go, see when you're here, oh, the bathroom seal's no done. There's dampness coming in that corner. The fire's no working. The boiler's no doing. This radiator's no working. I'm like, oh my God, why would you do one at a time? Why on earth? So, and then I say to myself, so is it just a case that you wait till I turn up and then give me a list of things to do? Because that's not what I want you to do. I want you to contact me when something goes wrong as a landlord. So maybe that is the benefit of having inspections.
Yeah, and I mean,
I as well. Sorry,
on you go.
I think besides obviously like a maintenance side of it, obviously we want to make sure the properties are kept compliant as well. So it means we can go in the amount of times that a tenant smoke alarm because it's beeping. Well, no, you need to put that back up there. So it makes sure that we can make sure smoke alarms are in place. You have a carbon monoxide detector in place, and it's not being taken down, and it's working as well as the key one. So besides the maintenance side of it, we're checking your properties are still compliant as well. They're up to legislation. And it also gives us a chance to build up a rapport with the tenant as well. So when issues do arise, you've got that bond with them, that you are able to discuss things with them, and they're not just another person on the end of the phone. Like the amount of tenants that we've got, I could tell you their dogs. Just going out and doing inspections, you build up a relationship with them, that they aren't just a person in a house.
I think that's as a landlord when I first started out that I felt that was easy to do. I loved doing that. I loved talking to my tenants. I loved engaging with my tenants. I loved helping my tenants. But it did come to the point where my career was overtaking what I was doing at that point in time, and I had to focus on, because I wanted to be a financial director and I wanted to be a financial controller in the industry, and I wanted to help run some major company. And that's where I wanted to be at that time. And I felt that because I had, 3 or 4 properties, it was like, God, really, it's now becoming a hindrance. It's like I need someone else to do it. And I must admit, at that point in time, I did try several agencies. Some of them are actually existing today. And I just didn't feel like I got this. I didn't feel that they were able to do what I did. Yeah. And that's when I felt that when we started Century 21, the franchises, and then when we changed to 5 properties and actually had our own engine and our own design and our own system, that's why I felt that all these things I got frustrated about in the first place, about other letting agents and how they didn't do things that I wanted them to do, was something that I wanted to put into our system so we would be able to do it, because I understood it completely as a landlord.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we definitely continue on with the kind of relationship that you had, Jim, obviously with tenants as a landlord in your own right. I think it's really important for us to have a good rapport with tenants. I mean, we've got a duty of care towards tenants anyway, but I mean, it makes it the whole process so much easier when you've got a good relationship with tenants. They feel comfortable speaking to you. They feel comfortable picking up the phone and saying, "Oh, I feel like this has gone wrong and this has gone wrong." If you didn't have that with your tenant, they won't pick up the phone and they won't report things, and it leaves you to an inspection then to find that. So yeah, definitely building up a good relationship with tenants is a really important factor.
Yeah, thanks for watching, Phil. And Phil says, yeah, it keeps the neighbour happy as well. It keeps everything nice and clean and tidy. It also, as well, and I'm going to argue for your side now. But as a landlord, it was something I did anyway. Because I always felt it was necessary, because you had that relationship. If anything ever went wrong, you always felt that my tenants always used to come to me and say, "Jim, look, something's wrong. Can you help me resolve it?" Because I was always there to do that with them. And whether it was, for me personally, whether it was they'd lost their job and I found them another job, or something had happened in their family that they needed advice on, I would give them advice on that as well. And that's why I said I often felt like I became a social worker.
You do feel like that sometimes.
Because I felt like I was involved in their lives now, and I felt that they were a part of my extended family, if that makes sense. For some landlords out there, you'll get that completely because that's how you are. I know if May and John Cropley are absolutely fantastic. They're great landlords, and that's how they feel as landlords. And these are the people that we all got together in the beginning and started a landlord association, which was Fife Landlords in 1999. December 1999 was when Fife Landlords was first formed. Fife Landlords then become NLA Scotland, the National Landlord Association for Scotland. And then subsequently, it became part of NLA, the bigger picture. And then that's why I ended up getting involved in politics and the government as well, at strategic level and at the Scottish government level, for that reason. But it was all these things that led from all my personal experiences is why we built our system how it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's amazing, like you say, going back to obviously tenant relationships. It's amazing how much a tenant lets you into their personal life and involves you in their day-to-day, which is fine. And you do feel a bit like a social worker, but then it allows you to build up a good relationship with them and help them, basically. Like I say, we do still have a duty of care for tenants, not just our landlords.
Is it sometimes a case of TMI?
Well, sometimes. I've had a few instances where
I really don't need to know that.
That's what it is.
But then that shows when TMI is too much information for anybody that's maybe not sure about that. Too much information. It's like, because that shows to a degree how important a relationship you have with your tenant. And I mean, I didn't like calling them tenant because a stranger is just a friend you've not met yet, if that makes sense. So I often think, I still, Jim Robertson, Jim's been with me for years, and Jim and Donald and all these people, and Arthur and they've all been with me for years as and I didn't want to say tenants, but they are legally. But they are actually an extended family to me because, we'd stop in the street and we'd have a chat for ages and we'd spend loads of time. Jim used to bring me fish all the time when he'd been out fishing, all these different things. And to me, that's a relationship you should have with someone in order to help resolve the situation. Because at the end of the day, you're providing them with a house, but you have to make sure you look after them because it is a responsibility more than anything, morally. If that makes sense. Even though it's legal, it's still morally right.
Yeah, and I think your relationship that you're referring to with some of your longer standing tenants has continued on to obviously myself and obviously even Karen and things now that we obviously look after your properties. When they come in the office, we have that relationship with them as well, and it's good to have that.
Yeah. So, I mean, how does that sound then? All the duties of a self-managed landlord adding value to your life, really, that's what it comes down to. Or can you see the benefits in having them being handled for you, if that makes sense? I mean, Phil says it right there in a nutshell. It really is a service.
Yeah.
We're in the business of service. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, obviously, it's a service, but it's how you deliver that service and how you manage it. And like Karen says, when you do things for a landlord and they're not even aware until you actually say to them, well, this happened and this is what we've done. And but, oh, great, you've done that for me then. That's what we're here to do.
I mean, think of Imagine Agent as a scientifically impossible preventative ibuprofen. So in other words, you might not be able to plan for a physical headache, but you can reduce the risk of your rental property becoming a pain in the neck, if that makes sense. That's and it is really, prevention is better than cure. That's what it comes down to. I mean, for us, really, emergency repairs, regular maintenance, changes to the laws, and unexpected events are not inconvenient interruptions. They're exactly what we're waiting for as a letting agency, if it makes sense. If we certainly don't spend our days doing nothing, yourself, you guys, like, this is often the case, but the phrase is, it's just money for old rope. Do you hear that?
Yeah.
before.
I know
Money for a rope. You didn't do
Quite
anything.
young for that one, I think.
Well, money for it. You know, it's the old thing about it's the market seller. They're selling something back which is absolutely worthless. And it's like really, there's no value in that at all in what you're doing. You know, so it's sort of like that. So people think it's money for a rope, and that's why we have some landlords. We no longer have this. Well, some landlords, because they'll go, oh well, I'll take these tenancies back because they're all running perfectly, but you can have all the problematic ones, and you know, we'll just pass them on to you. It's like no. This I liken a managing agent to an insurance policy. They've got everything at their hands to make things happen in as quick as possible time and resolve it quicker than you can yourself if anything goes wrong. Plus the fact they're taking the hassle and the efforts away from you. That is what a managing agent should be. If you want to put up with that, that's fine. Manage your own properties. There is a market for that, and people love doing that. But as Stephen Clark said, you know, Stephen Clark's a really good investor and an up-and-coming investor. He's switched on. He knows what he's talking about in terms of investment return. I don't want to be a letting agent. I want to be an investor and not a landlord, but an armchair investor. I don't want to be a landlord. I don't want to know the legislation. I don't want to know anything else. I just want a managing agent to look after it. And all I want to do is be an investor who goes out and makes money and maximizes my return. That's really what it comes down to. So you've got a trade-off there. Do you actually want to do that or do you not? And there is a market for it and there's a not market for it. But to a degree, and I spoke about it the other day, I call things like that broke mentality. If you can make, and I've said it before, if you can make 50 quid an hour doing something else, why on earth would you not pay somebody else £10 an hour to go and do the job that you would otherwise have done, and it would have cost you the £50? Because I'm an accountant, manufacturing, opportunity cost, this is called, or opportunity loss. In other words, if you go and spend an hour doing £10 an hour, you've effectively lost £40 an hour because you could have earned £50 an hour doing something else. So it's exactly the same mentality as what Stephen says. I'd rather spend my time on things that make a lot more money and pay other people to do the jobs that otherwise wouldn't pay me that return. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, and like you say, it all comes back to, obviously, like they say, the comment about money for old rope, and you do get landlords that are like, what am I paying you for it? I mean, nothing's went wrong, nothing's happened, but you think nothing's went wrong or nothing's happened because we've dealt with it. And do you know what I mean? And even if there's not necessarily a maintenance issue, maybe the tenant's just picking up the phone and speaking to us. And do you know what I mean? Like you say, even a personal issue, things like that. Whereas if we weren't in place, they'd be phoning you and using up your time to do that. Whereas that's what we're doing. And the prevention thing as well. We prevent.
Final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think one of my key things would be make sure you have an agency that's local to your area. Because, for example, yesterday I had to go and check what door handles were missing at a property, and it was fine because it was 5 minutes up the road. So you need somebody that is on hand, that knows the area, knows the people, and knows your property, and just nip out at the drop of a hat if needed.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave the final word with Dougie. He says it all. I can definitely see the benefits as portfolio grows. We'll definitely be in touch to have them managed. That's the key here. And the final word rests with you, Dougie. And I want to say thanks very much, guys, for all commenting and taking part. Dougie, Phil, James, May, Charlotte. And so thanks very much for guys. Show. It's going to be a fantastic show. Look forward to that at 9:30 again. I'll see you all again. Tomorrow I've got my Sunday slot. I'm going to talk about the John and Brian story at the Sunday slot. Now, it's nothing to do with properties. I'm promoting on here though. This is John O'Brien. It got the legislation changed in Scotland and his campaign to do that after the tragic death of his son with solvent abuse. Okay, so tune in tomorrow, 10:30, Sunday slot. We're going to be on the John O'Brien story. And thanks, Karen. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time today. Have a good day today. And thanks very much, Richard. And I'll see everybody else tomorrow. Thanks very much, guys. Bye for now.
Okay, bye.